Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathim and listen. May the best blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to go through growth and the importance of, the infancy stage, essentially the stage when you think about children, when children are within that, when they're first being born up until like the first 5 years, that critical stage where a lot of development and skills are acquired, right? Certain things are being understanding is being bestowed upon. So what I did, and I looked it up just briefly, and I just wanted to read this just to kind of set the tone of what I'm trying to convey here, right? So I went to Google and I typed in how important is early childhood development. So the overview here, it says that early childhood development is critically important because the first 5 years of a child's life lay the foundation for lifelong well-being and success. It says this period of rapid brain development is when the child acquires fundamental skills like language, social interaction, emotional regulation, it says, which are essential for future learning. So it elaborates on some different, skills. So here it says brain development, you know, um, it says foundational skills, like what I just read through earlier. It says long-term impacts, social and emotional development, educational and economic benefits, cognitive, physical, emotional, and social development in children. It says, let's see what else I can get off here. So pretty much you get a foundation of proper learning. And you might say, okay, Raquai, why are you reading this? Right? So I'm reading this to convey the point that, through the infancy stage, is very, very important in your development. And it's crucial that because the scriptures talk about, sincere milk, you know, um, how to understand and go, I guess, precept upon precept. Those are foundational tools that you learn, right? And one of the things I've been stressing a lot lately is character, is fruits of the spirit, these sorts of things, because we're coming out of a degenerate culture, a degenerate, and still being in a, when I say in it, like in it in a physical sense, in a degenerate society where we come out of this so-called black, dark, Hispanic rap culture that is strongly pushed upon our people, and that cultivates our people to be a bunch of degenerate plants. And the Lord created us to be essentially a noble vine and a holy and right seed, right? We weren't supposed to be a plant, a degenerate vine, but this is what happens, you know, when we cling to the ways of the heathen. And Jeremiah says, to learn not the ways of the heathen, right? Because their customs are vain. So coming back to your nationality, it gives you like an understanding of how to actually conduct yourself, fear of the Lord, conduct amongst your own kin, conduct, honoring your father and your mother, those sorts of fundamental things, you know um just a plethora of different basics that helps you to nourish as a child, because we're having to kind of throw out all the nonsense, all the serpent's philosophies, because like for myself, for example, I went to what's it called, higher education, and you kind of have to throw out all that BS, all that filth, all that serpent juice, all those fruits, right? That the serpent pushes forth through his school system, right? And have to be essentially abased and be retaught and reprogrammed in righteousness, basically, right? So, you know, that's pretty much the premise. I kind of rambled a bit here and there, but I sincerely hope, that this lesson really is edifying, right? So this is the first precept in Proverbs. This is chapter 22, verse 6, and it says, "Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it," right? So, as a matter of fact, let me get that in the AMP, see what it says there. Just bear with me on this 1 second. Okay, this is Proverbs 22, verse 6 in the AMP Amplified Version, and it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, teaching him to seek the Most High Yahweh Bashem Shai's wisdom and will for his abilities and talents. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it," right? So this is how we happen to be essentially being reprogrammed, in righteousness, kind of like, your phone, when you think about like a phone, for example, your phone goes through, I think there's this option where it goes through factory settings, right? So pretty much, going back to factory settings of how we actually ought to conduct ourselves. Because, also, like it says in Jeremiah, we discontinued from our heritage and picked up lots of vain practices that didn't essentially pretty much displease the Lord, right? And this is one of the things, when you think about our nation as a whole, our nation lacks proper culture. They lack these precepts, and through these precepts they get understanding not just of your overall condition as a whole, but it gives you understanding of how to actually conduct yourselves, being from a particular bloodline, ergo Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Being an Israelite, because our people don't lack this understanding, and the scriptures talk about how wisdom pretty much is the principal thing, and with all that get understanding, right? So, having to be essentially retaught and refurbished. I don't want to say the word refurbished, but reprogrammed, properly be brainwashed. When people think brainwashed, they think about, something in a wicked sense, but we're being brainwashed properly through righteousness. As a matter of fact, since I said wash, this is Ephesians chapter 5, verse 26, and it says that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, right? So it's the word that is properly cleansing us from these abominable practices of the world, right? These ways only promote death, destruction, like the scriptures say. The wages of sin is death, right? All these different gods all carry a filthy vibration, and we were all doing it, birthdays and Christmas and Easter and, so on and so forth. These different abominable practices, essentially what they do is that they dim your vibration, and Jake doesn't understand that. The ways of these different gods, and they're all recycled from, whether it's one of the four beasts as discussed in Daniel the 7th chapter. They're all recycled in some way, shape, or fashion, and they came repackaged, revamped, and now they're just being brought forth essentially again in Babylon the Great. It's no coincidence. Babylon the Great is described as the mother of all harlots, because she encompasses, aka America, encompasses all those different abominable practices that existed in all the other kingdoms that existed before, right? So, you know, knowing, your knowing and being, of a particular seed line, knowing that you're an Israelite, it comes with proper instruction, and this is what our people strongly lack, in today's day and age, right? you know, um, let's let me go here. This is the book of Judges, chapter 2, verse 10. I'll start at verse 8 just to establish a context here. And it says, "And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died being 110 years old. And they buried him in the border of his inheritance with the Timnath Rees in the mount of Ephraim on the north side of the hill Gash." And it says, "And also that all that generation that were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, and nor yet the works which he had done for Israel." Right? So essentially, there was a new generation that came up, not knowing the ways of the Lord. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served Baalim. And they forsook the Lord, our power, Yahweh, Bashim Shai, of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, followed other gods, of the gods of the people which were around about them, right? And this is the condition of how you see our people pretty much today, being surrounded by these different heathens. Jake's mind has become ensnared and entrapped into these abominable practices. A case in point, like when I grew up in the Caribbean, and we don't celebrate Halloween there. That's not a common thing there. But one of the things I've noticed, comparing the two, environments, our people, essentially when they get to a certain age and they raise children and they bring them to countries like the UK, the United States, or Canada, their ways, their children eventually start to take on these different new ways. So for example, they start to partake in Halloween and other customs that their parents never used to partake in, right? But the point is to show that the children need to be brought up knowing and armed with this information of knowing who they are, right? They need, because it helps to protect against these different devices, being surrounded by these heathens, right? Knowing the ways of the Lord, and knowing what displeases the Lord, and knowing what displeases the Lord. And this is information that our people don't adhere to. This is information that essentially would essentially protect them. But these precepts, these understanding, is only given to a very select few. But the point is that Jake's mind, because generation after generation after generation passes by, they lose and start to forsake the ways of Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? And they get ensnared by being around these different heathens. The scriptures talk about how the righteous is more excellency than his neighbor, but the ways of wicked seduceth them, right? So our people have been seduced, into these abominable practices, and you can see that very well rampant in the entertainment industry. The way they do, I'm sorry, the way they treat their own children, when A lot of our people, when they get famous, you see the way they turn their children out. You see a lot of their children are now becoming essentially idol worshippers or a sacrifice. They're showing them that they're turning inside out. They're turning into transformers, robots in disguise. They're turning into Decepticons. They're being offed by their parents. They're being brought into lewd practices. This is why knowing your culture is so important, because they're so easily to be preyed upon by these different heathens, right? The scriptures talk about how our people are destroyed for what? Lack of knowledge, right? So it shows you the importance of childhood, and kind of like, a case in point, on a simple level, you know, your parents, when you're young, they tell you, don't touch the hot stove, or don't get into a car with strangers. That is important information to maintaining their livelihood, right? And how much more the scriptures, the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, the customs that's supposed to keep you whole, keep you separate, keep you enlightened, right? Scriptures talk about turn thou, O Jacob, that thou mayest be illuminated, right? Be illuminated to who your enemies are. Be illuminated to your understanding of your captivity, and being illuminated to these things. But it shows you we're a generation that is destroyed and disarmed because we don't have knowledge, right? Our infancy has been compromised. Right? So raising children, the children need to be armed with this sorts of this proper information, right? That's how they stay properly cultivated within their own culture, right? So let me just grab this here. So I'm just going to read this chapter a little bit and read down. This is Tobit chapter 4, verse 1, and it says, in that day Tobit remembered the money which he had committed to Gabriel in Regis in Media, and it says, and said to himself, I wish for death, wherefore do I not call for my son Tobias, that he may signify to him of all the money before I die. And when he had called him, he said, my son, when I am dead, bury me, and despise not thy mother, but honor her all the days of thy life, and do that which shall please her, and grieve her not. Right? And that's in our law. Right? You honor your father and your mother. Right? Verse 4, and it says, remember, my son, she saw many dangers for thee. And when thou wast in her womb, and when she is dead, bury her by me in one grave. My son, going back to instructions, right? Going back to understanding. It says, my son, be mindful of the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Awashai all thy days, and let not thy will be set to sin or transgress against his commandments. So imagine, if you thought about it, how much of our children would be in a better off situation being armed with the mindset of performing these precepts, so they keep themselves out of trouble. They remain essentially obedient children. But now what we have in this culture, in this society, is that you have a culture that promotes the degeneracy, of our children, right? You have a bunch of ungodly YNs. You have people, breaking them into jewelry stores. They're filled with the fury. You can't tell them anything. They don't have the emotional capacity to be able to be reasoned with, right? You talk to them and they're so triggered, right? And because it shows you they lack the fundamentals of children. So now you have these grown adults that have their emotional problems. They have dietary problems because our people don't eat very well. And diabetes is a big problem because they don't follow the law, right? They're not eating the proper foods, right? So they got emotional problems. They have health problems. They got, anger, they have self-esteem issues, and it shows you how much importance, having a family household, especially fathers in your household, does a tremendous job and a tremendous impact upon children. Children that have, fathers in the whole, father, sorry, fathers in the household have a healthier, um, have more confidence. They have a higher self-esteem, right? It shows you there's a benefit into having, um, a family, father and mother in the household, because they play crucial roles in raising the children, right? But what does Esau do in this society? He's had a hand in breaking up, the Israelite family, taking the fathers out of the household, uplifting the mother into a position of authority, and then taxing her, bamboozling her minds with serpent's philosophies, telling her she can raise and do children all on their own. And what does that do? That compromises the the welfare of raising children, because now you're more focused on trying to put food on the table, and it reduces the children to essentially, I don't want to say a statistic, but their children, their infancy is a lot more compromised because they're not receiving that nurturing aspect from their mothers. They're not receiving the proper instructions from their fathers, right? That encouragement, you get the I don't want to say the encouragement from the father, and then you also get that proper nourishment from the mother also. you know she's more focused on trying to feed the children, right? But she is, trying to work, right? And your children are left to, buy abominable foods, not buying the right foods for their development. So now their development is now compromised, right? So it shows you that both parents are very essential, especially the father in the household, right? We're seeing the detrimental effects on children who don't have that, right? um, Before I move on, I just wanted to make this quick point also. I remember reading an article on, it was Alexander the Great. And one of the things that was very interesting about his childhood is the fact that he had a very, very nurturing mother. His mother encouraged him. He was a heathen, and it's very interesting, and it shows you how important mothers are in the household, in order, in decency and in order, right? It shows you that his nurturing, that relationship with his mother, encouraged him and formed him for him to play that critical role in prophecy, that believing that he could do anything, right? So imagine, when you think about it, your children being raised with that proper understanding, right? Your mother giving you that proper understanding of, okay, your father was this, we come from a line of, kings and priests, you know what I'm saying? That would make a tremendous benefit. And raising children that are a lot more stronger, and I don't mean just physically, right? Rather than having to think of themselves as equal to to these heathens, because we know that we're above the heathens, right? Anyways, I just wanted to share that quick point, that blurb there, something I read recently. But I'm just gonna finish reading. I'm just gonna read a little bit of this and go down. It says, I'll read verse 5 again, Tobit 4 and 5, and it says, "My son, be mindful of the Lord Yahweh Bashmel Shai all thy days, and let not thy will be set to sin, and to transgress his commandments, and do uprightly all thy life long, and do not follow the ways of unrighteousness. If thou deal truly, thy doings shall prosperously succeed. And to all them that live justly, give alms of thy substance. And when thou givest alms, let not thy eye be envious, neither turn thy face away from any poor. And the face of the Lord, Yahweh Bashmel Shai, shall not be turned away from thee." right? So when you think about it, his father is giving him proper, righteous, spiritual game. Kind of like, how you have like people that say, yo, let me give you some game, how to get that girl. His father is giving him some spiritual cheat codes, some spiritual game, giving him, the inside scoop, how to please the Lord, right? And it shows you, how important both parents are in the household, especially having a father, a man of understanding, right? So, um, okay, this is Deuteronomy 6. Um, uh, Verse 7, and it says, "And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." Right? So, that is a spiritual game. These laws, statutes, and commandments, and these precepts, it promotes a moral Israelite etiquette, how they're supposed to conduct themselves, right? But it shows the contrast between how the son Tobias in that story was being instructed, and then when you look at the Pookies and Ray Rays in Babylon, how they are instructed. They're not instructed in the ways of the Lord. They're instructed in the ways of Esau and the way he deals with his own people. That warlike spirit to detest, elders of your nation, to detest, grown men, to detest your father, to harass and be what's the word I'm looking for? To be a nightmare unto your mother, to be essentially to be a tyrant in your house, or a lion in your house, right? This is what our people need. They need proper cultivation, right? But a lot of these youths, they're not gonna get that. A lot of them are gonna be uprooted from the vineyard, right? But anyways, I kind of just want to touch on that in regards to the importance of infancy and the proper in righteousness, receiving proper milk and proper cultivation. I kind of went here and there a little bit, but I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashan Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.